All right, things are getting better than you think. Lecture number 1. Let's try this. All right, so this is a lecture that's based on Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now, which is a really interesting book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's not required. You don't have to read the book to answer any questions on the exam. Anything that will be on the exam will be here in the slide somewhere. So you don't have to read it, but I recommend it. It's a nice antidote to negative news. So this is a quote by Nobel Prize winner Bob Lucas, a famous University of Chicago economist. He said in 1988 that once you start to think about economic growth, and in particular exponential economic growth, it's hard to think about anything else. So what did he mean by that? So famous economics platitude is that there is no free lunch. But maybe economic growth is itself a free lunch. So what I mean by that is that if you think about economic growth, I like to think about the economy as a factory. Right? So how do we think about a factory? Well, in a factory you got some stuff coming in. Let's say workers. We got workers here. A little hard hat because he's a worker. Look at that hard hat. And we also have machines. So we represent machines by this robot worker. They go into a factory. Factory. And then out the other side comes stuff that we want. So it might be a car, or it might be something else. Maybe it would be a house, whatever you like. These are the things that are produced by labor and capital. So what is economic growth? It says we put in the same amount of this stuff. So if you put in the same amount of inputs, more outputs come out. So same comes in, and more comes out the other side. So the amount of resources we have in the world is limited, but potentially the amount of stuff we have is not. Because if we think about better ways to combine things, then we can save on materials and make more stuff on the other side. So there's a famous paper, I might mention it a couple of times in this class, about soccer balls. So if you know a soccer ball, it's made of hexagons and pentagons. So hexagons, I'm going to draw this really badly, but a hexagon, you can actually quite easily tile a plane with hexagons. Okay, so this is a bunch of very poorly drawn hexagons, but you can see that you don't actually waste any. If you have material, suppose you got leather and you're cutting hexagons out of the leather, then you don't actually waste any leather. Pentagons, on the other hand, pentagons you can't tile. There's no way to draw them so that there's no missing, there's no space. Here, I'll show you what I mean. So maybe you want to do this. Oh, I screwed that one up already. But it's like that. You can't actually get pentagons to fit together. See, this one's no longer a regular pentagon. So it turns out that one way to stamp these out of, say, a piece of leather to make a soccer ball would just be to do a bunch of pentagons side by side like that. You can imagine like that. But this is a relatively wasteful way of making pentagons. You end up wasting a lot of leather. This is also how actually soccer balls were made for a long time. And then somebody came up with a way of fitting pentagons together so that it wasted less leather. So in other words, the same amount of leather would go into a factory, but more soccer balls come out the other side. So, that idea, the idea about how to stamp the soccer balls so that more pentagons come out of the same sheet of leather, that's a free lunch, right? That's the sense in which economic growth is a free lunch. Better ideas means that we can actually produce more with the same amount of inputs. Okay? That's how I want you to think about economic growth. So, there's this economics maxim, there's no free lunch. Well, economic growth itself is the free lunch. So here's an example of an occupation that no longer exists. So, well, I guess it still exists, but it's much smaller. So it's called stevedores. Stevedores was an occupation that was people that would carry things onto and off of ships. Okay, so if you look here, these people are carrying bananas off of a ship. So the bananas were loaded here in these cargo bays. And then people would grab them and carry them off. So this is not how this is done. I should say there's one more step, right? So they carry them off of the ship and they put them onto a truck. There must be a truck over here somewhere that's taking the bananas somewhere else. Now what happens is ships are... Can I draw here? No, I can't. Ships carry things called containers, which are basically boxes made of corrugated metal. And these things are regular, so there's container ships that carry many of these. You can fit 10,000 bananas into one of these containers. They can be refrigerated. You load them on the ship, and then there's a special crane that can just take it off the ship and put it directly onto a truck that can then drive away. So this whole thing of carrying the bananas off of the ship onto the truck is no longer necessary, because the crane can just take this crate and put it onto the trucks. That's doing the same thing but using less labor, maybe more capital, but just overall it's a much cheaper way to get things onto and off of ships. So that's, again, the kind of free lunch we're talking about. Yeah. So maybe I should, well, I guess I got a couple more slides about economic growth. So if you think about economic growth, this is time here. So here's time, or years I should say. This is like year zero. And then it goes all the way up to the year 2000, or maybe a little after the year 2000. So if you look at the total output of the world for this period in terms of 2011 dollars, so we're holding constant dollars. This is just like constant money. I can't actually recall whether this is per capita or overall, but it doesn't really matter. No, it can't be per capita, so this is that means trillions, right? So this is the total output of the world economy. And what you can see is that basically it was flat until right around here, around 1700. And since then, it's just totally taken off. So, this doesn't seem so surprising because it's so obvious to us. Of course people were poor in 1400. That was the Middle Ages. Of course they were poor. But, the world hasn't changed, right? There's the same amount of resources in the world today as there were in 1400. It's the same old world, the same laws of physics. And yet, we're so much more productive today. We can create so much more value today. Remember, these are constant dollars. So, how do we do it? Basically, we did it with better ideas about how to combine things. Better ideas about how to take those inputs into inputs and turn them into outputs that we want. And it's not something that's, of course, inequality has increased because in 1600, everybody was poor. But again, now we've got 1600, the years going from 1600 to 2000, probably 15 or 16. And we're looking at, this must be income per capita in 2011 dollars. So now this is per capita, per person income. And what you see is that all over the world, this has been growing. It's true that some places, the United States, the UK, this has grown a lot, whereas in India and China, it's grown less. But it's still grown, and it's still grown, especially in China, grown quite dramatically in the last few years. So let's stop there, and then I'll make another video and start here.